at the familiar sights of his childhood neighborhood, memories flooding back as they passed the small tea stalls and workshops that had shaped his early years. This wasn't a planned political visit. It was something far more personal. The convoy had stopped unexpectedly when Modi spotted something that made his heart skip a beat. Through the dusty window of a small automotive repair shop, he saw a figure hunched over an old motorcycle engine, his weathered hands working with the same precision Modi remembered from decades ago. The man's hair had turned completely grey, his clothes were stained with oil and grease, but there was no mistaking that profile. "Stop the car," Modi instructed his security detail, his voice barely above a whisper. The officers exchanged concerned glances. This wasn't part of the scheduled route, and stopping unannounced posed significant security risks. But something in the Prime Minister's expression told them this was non-negotiable. As the vehicles came to a halt, curious onlookers began to gather, their phones already recording what they assumed would be another political photo opportunity. They had no idea they were about to witness something far more profound, a reunion that would challenge everything they thought they knew about power, friendship, and the choices that define our lives. Modi stepped out of the car, ignoring the frantic whispers of his security team. The mechanic, oblivious to the commotion outside, continued working on the engine, his concentration absolute. It was only when a shadow fell across his workspace that he looked up, and in that moment time seemed to freeze. "Rajesh!" Modi's voice cracked slightly as he spoke the name he hadn't uttered in over 30 years. The wrench slipped from Rajesh's oil-stained fingers, clattering to the concrete floor with a metallic ring that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent street. His eyes, once bright with the dreams they had shared as young men, now showed a mixture of shock, recognition, and something else. Something that looked almost like fear. "Narendra?" The word came out as barely a whisper, as if Rajesh couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. The boy who had once shared his textbooks, who had dreamed alongside him of changing the world, now stood before him as the most powerful man in India. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding, but neither man seemed aware of their presence. They were transported back to a different time, a different world, one where two young boys from modest families had made promises to each other about the men they would become. Modi took a step forward, his usual composed demeanor cracking as emotions he had buried for decades began to surface. "My friend, what happened to you? What happened to us?" Rajesh's hands trembled as he wiped them on his already dirty shirt, a gesture that spoke of deep-seated shame and years of disappointment. "Life happened, Narendra. Life happened." The weight of those simple words hung in the air between them, carrying with them the story of two paths that had diverged so dramatically that they now seemed to belong to different universes. One had risen to the highest office in the land, commanding the respect and attention of billions. The other had remained in the shadows, his dreams slowly eroded by the harsh realities of survival. But as Modi looked into his old friend's eyes, he saw something that the years of struggle hadn't been able to extinguish, the same spark of intelligence, the same fundamental decency that had drawn them together as children. And in that moment, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "We need to talk," Modi said, his voice steady now, filled with a determination that his political allies would have recognized. "Really talk." Rajesh glanced nervously at the growing crowd, at the security personnel who were clearly uncomfortable with this unscripted encounter, at the cameras that were undoubtedly capturing every moment. "Narendra, this isn't the place. You're the Prime Minister now. People are watching." "Let them watch," Modi replied, surprising everyone within earshot. "Some things are more important than protocol." The mechanic's shop, which moments before had been just another anonymous workspace in the maze of Ahmedabad's old quarter, had suddenly become the center of national attention. But for the two men at its heart, the world had narrowed to just this moment, this recognition, this opportunity to bridge a gap that had seemed unbridgeable. Rajesh's wife, Meera, emerged from the small living quarters behind the shop, drawn by the unusual commotion. When she saw who was standing in her husband's workspace, her face went pale. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in their generation had heard about the boy from their neighborhood who had risen to become prime minister. But she had never imagined that this legendary figure had once been her husband's closest friend. "Meera," Rajesh said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "you remember the stories I used to tell you about my school friend, the one who was going to change the world?" She nodded slowly, her eyes moving between her husband and the Prime Minister, beginning to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding before her. Modi stepped forward, his hands pressed together in a traditional namaste. "Meera ji, it's an honor to finally meet you. Rajesh wrote to me about your wedding many years ago. I'm sorry I couldn't attend." The simple acknowledgement hit Rajesh like a physical blow. Modi had remembered. After all these years, after all the power and responsibility that had accumulated around him, he had remembered a letter from an old friend about a wedding in a small neighborhood in Ahmedabad. "You kept my letters?" Rajesh asked, his voice barely audible. "I kept everything," Modi replied, and there was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't just talking about letters. The crowd had grown larger now, with local news crews arriving and social media buzzing with speculation about this unexpected encounter. But inside the small circle of the repair shop, a different kind of drama was unfolding, one that spoke to the deepest questions about friendship, loyalty, and the paths we choose in life. Rajesh's son, Arjun, a young man in his early 20s, pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with excitement and confusion. He had grown up hearing fragments of stories about his father's past, about dreams that had been abandoned and opportunities that had slipped away. But he had never imagined that those stories connected to the man who now led their nation. "Papa," Arjun whispered urgently, "what's happening? Why is the Prime Minister here?" Before Rajesh could answer, Modi turned to the young man with a smile that was both sad and hopeful. "You must be Arjun. Your father used to write to me about you when you were small. He was so proud when you started school, when you learned to read." Arjun stared at this revelation, trying to process the idea that the Prime Minister of India knew his name, knew details about his childhood. His father had never mentioned maintaining any contact with his famous friend. "But Papa," Arjun said, turning to his father with confusion evident in his voice, "you never said you still talked to him. You never said—" "We stopped talking years ago," Rajesh admitted, his shame evident. "I stopped writing. I thought he had moved beyond people like us." The pain in those words was palpable, and Modi felt each syllable like a knife to his heart. This was the cost of ambition, the price of power, the gradual erosion of the connections that had once meant everything. "You were wrong," Modi said simply. "You were always wrong about that." As the two men stood facing each other in the cramped confines of the repair shop, surrounded by the tools of Rajesh's trade and the weight of their shared history, it became clear that this encounter was about more than just a chance meeting between old friends. It was about the choices that define us, the dreams we abandon, and the possibility of redemption even when it seems too late. The security detail was growing increasingly nervous, their earpieces crackling with urgent communications from headquarters. This unscheduled stop was creating a security nightmare, and every minute they remained increased the risk. But Modi seemed oblivious to their concerns, his entire focus concentrated on the man standing before him. "Rajesh," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his office but also the warmth of their shared past. "I want you to come with me. There's something I need to show you, something I should have shown you years ago." The mechanic looked around at his shop, at his life's work spread out in organized chaos around him. "Narendra, I can't just leave." I have customers, responsibilities. Your customers can wait, Modi said firmly. This can't. As if to emphasize the point, one of Modi's assistants stepped forward and began speaking quietly to the small group of customers who had been waiting for their vehicles to be repaired. Within minutes, arrangements had been made, alternative mechanics had been contacted, and the immediate concerns of Rajesh's business had been addressed with an efficiency that spoke to the resources at the Prime Minister's disposal. But even as these practical matters were being resolved, the emotional weight of the situation continued to build. Meera watched her husband's face, seeing emotions there that she hadn't witnessed in years. The resignation and quiet desperation that had become his default expression were being replaced by something else. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the memory of hope. "Where are we going?" Rajesh asked, his voice uncertain. Modi smiled, and for a moment the years fell away and he was once again the ambitious young man who had shared his dreams with his best friend. "To see what we built together, even when we were apart." The cryptic answer only deepened the mystery, but something in Modi's expression convinced Rajesh to trust him. With a nod to his wife and son, he wiped his hands one final time on his work shirt and stepped toward the waiting convoy. As they walked toward the cars, the crowd parted before them, phones capturing every moment of this unprecedented scene. But for Rajesh, the world had narrowed to just this moment. This decision to trust in a friendship that he had thought was lost forever. The drive through Ahmedabad took them away from the familiar streets of the old city and toward a part of town that Rajesh rarely visited. As they traveled, Modi spoke quietly about the years that had passed, about the weight of responsibility and the loneliness of power. But he also spoke about memory, about the dreams they had shared as young men, and about the ways those dreams had shaped everything that came after. "Do you remember," Modi asked as they passed a particular intersection, "the promise we made to each other when we were 16? Rajesh's breath caught in his throat. Of course he remembered. It was the promise that had haunted him for decades, the vow that had made every compromise, every abandoned dream, feel like a betrayal not just of himself, but of the boy who had believed in him so completely. They had promised each other that no matter how high they rose or how far they traveled, they would never forget where they came from. They would never forget the people who had shaped them, and they would never let success separate them from their roots or from each other. It was a promise that until this moment, Rajesh had believed they had both broken. The convoy pulled up in front of a modern building that Rajesh didn't recognize, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. As they stepped out of the cars, Modi placed a hand on his old friend's shoulder, a gesture that was captured by dozens of cameras but felt intensely private nonetheless. "Come," Modi said simply. "Let me show you what your friendship gave me." They walked through the building's lobby, past security checkpoints and curious staff members, until they reached an elevator that carried them to the top floor. When the doors opened, Rajesh found himself in a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city they had both called home. But it wasn't the view that took his breath away. It was what he saw on the walls. Every letter he had ever written to Modi was there, carefully framed and displayed. Photos from their school days, including several that Rajesh had forgotten existed. A copy of their class yearbook open to a page where they had both written about their dreams for the future. And in the center of it all, a simple wooden frame containing a handwritten note that Rajesh recognized immediately. It was the promise they had made to each other at 16, written in their young handwriting and signed by both of them. The promise that had shaped Modi's entire approach to leadership, the reminder that had kept him grounded even as he rose to the highest levels of power. "You kept it all," Rajesh whispered, his voice breaking. "I told you," Modi replied. "I kept everything." As Rajesh stood in that room, surrounded by the artifacts of a friendship he had thought was lost, He began to understand that this encounter was about more than just a chance meeting. It was about the power of memory, the importance of roots, and the possibility that even the most broken connections could be repaired. But it was also about something else, something that would become clear only as the full story unfolded. Because Modi hadn't just kept these mementos as nostalgic reminders of his past. He had kept them as a roadmap for his future, a constant reminder of the values and relationships that had shaped him into the leader he had become. And now, standing face to face with the friend whose memory had guided him through decades of political struggle, Modi was about to reveal the true extent of what their friendship had meant, not just to him personally, but to the entire nation he now served. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the office, casting long shadows across the room as the two men stood surrounded by the physical evidence of a bond that had survived decades of separation. But this was only the beginning of a story that would challenge everything both men thought they knew about success, sacrifice, and the true meaning of friendship. As Rajesh reached out with trembling fingers to touch the framed promise they had made as boys, he had no idea that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. And Modi, watching his old friend's reaction, felt a sense of completion that all his political victories had never been able to provide. The real story was just beginning. As Rajesh absorbed the overwhelming display of their preserved friendship, Modi moved to his desk and withdrew a thick folder that had clearly been handled many times over the years. The leather cover was worn smooth, and Rajesh could see his own name written in Modi's distinctive handwriting across the front. "There's something else you need to see," Modi said, his voice carrying a weight that made Rajesh look up from the framed promise. "Something I've been working on for the past 15 years. He opened the folder to reveal architectural plans, financial documents, and photographs of construction sites. But these weren't government projects or political initiatives. As Rajesh leaned closer, he realized he was looking at plans for technical training centers, automotive workshops, and educational facilities specifically designed for underprivileged youth. "The Rajesh Patel Technical Education Initiative," Modi said quietly, pointing to the header on the first document. "Named after the most brilliant mechanic I ever knew, and the friend who taught me that true intelligence isn't measured by the degrees on your wall, but by the problems you can solve with your hands." Rajesh's legs gave out, and he sank into the nearest chair, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "You named a national program after me? Not just named after you," Modi corrected. "Inspired by you. Every time I visited a village where young people had no opportunities, every time I met a brilliant mind trapped by circumstances, I thought about you. I thought about the boy who could fix any machine, who understood engines better than our teachers understood textbooks, but who never got the chance to show the world what he was capable of. Read." The documents showed a network of training centers across India, each one equipped with state-of-the-art facilities and designed to provide practical skills training to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. The program had already graduated over 50,000 students, many of whom had gone on to start their own businesses or secure well-paying jobs in the automotive and manufacturing sectors. "This is impossible," Rajesh whispered, flipping through page after page of evidence. "You're telling me that all of these lives changed. It was because of me." "Because of us," Modi corrected. "Because of what we promised each other, and because I never forgot the lesson you taught me when we were 12 years old." Rajesh looked up, confusion evident in his eyes. "What lesson?" Modi smiled, the expression transforming his face and making him look, for a moment, like the boy Rajesh had once known. "Do you remember when I broke my bicycle trying to impress that girl from the next street? I was so embarrassed, so angry at myself for being stupid. I wanted to throw the whole thing away." The memory came flooding back, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. Rajesh had found Modi sitting beside his mangled bicycle, tears of frustration streaming down his face. Instead of offering empty comfort, Rajesh had simply sat down beside him and started examining the damage. "You didn't tell me it would be okay," Modi continued. "You didn't tell me not to worry about it. You just looked at that broken bicycle and said, 'Everything can be fixed, Narendra. You just have to understand how it works and be willing to put in the effort.' And then we spent the whole weekend taking it apart and putting it back together," Rajesh said softly, the memory bringing a smile to his face despite his emotional state. "That bicycle ran better after we fixed it than it ever had before," Modi said. "And that's when I learned the most important lesson of my life, that broken things aren't worthless things, that with the right knowledge, the right effort and the right support, anything can be repaired and made stronger than it was before." He gestured toward the documents spread across the desk. "Every training center in this program is built on that principle. We take young people whose dreams have been broken by poverty, by lack of opportunity, by a system that doesn't recognize their potential, and we give them the tools to fix not just machines, but their own lives." Rajesh was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he understood the magnitude of what his friend had accomplished. "But why didn't you tell me? All these years, why didn't you let me know?" Modi's expression grew serious, and for the first time since their reunion, Rajesh saw a flash of the political leader he had become. "Because I was a coward," he admitted. "Because I was afraid that if I reached out to you, you would see how far I had traveled from the boy you once knew. I was afraid you would think I was just another politician trying to use our friendship for publicity. And because," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I was afraid of what I would find. I was afraid that life had broken you in ways that even I couldn't fix." The honesty of the admission hung between them, raw and painful. Both men understood that this fear had cost them decades of friendship, decades of shared experiences and mutual support that could never be recovered. "But I was wrong," Modi said, looking directly into his friend's eyes. "Seeing you today, seeing the man you've become, the father you are, the way you've maintained your dignity and your skills despite everything, I realized that you were never broken. You were just temporarily out of alignment." Rajesh laughed through his tears, recognizing the mechanical metaphor. "Like a car that needs a tune-up?" "Exactly like that," Modi grinned. "And I think I know just the mechanic for the job." As the emotional weight of the moment began to settle, Modi moved to another section of his office and retrieved a set of keys from his desk drawer. "There's one more thing," he said, holding up the keys. "The flagship center of the program is here in Ahmedabad. It's been waiting for its director for 3 years now." Rajesh stared at the keys, understanding immediately what was being offered. "Narendra, I can't. I'm just a neighborhood mechanic. I don't have the education, the credentials." "You have something better," Modi interrupted. "You have the knowledge, the skill, and the heart. You understand what these young people are going through because you've lived it. You know what it means to have talent that the world doesn't recognize, dreams that seem impossible to achieve." He placed the keys in Rajesh's palm, closing his friend's fingers around them. "I'm not offering you charity, Rajesh. I'm offering you the chance to do what we always dreamed of doing together, changing the world, one person at a time." The weight of the keys seemed to represent far more than just access to a building. They represented possibility, redemption, and the chance to transform years of struggle into something meaningful and lasting. "What about my shop?" Rajesh asked, though his voice lacked conviction. "My customers depend on me." "Your shop will always be there," Modi said. "But think about how many more people you could help, how many more lives you could change. Think about Arjun and what it would mean for him to see his father not just as a mechanic, but as an educator, a leader, someone who helps others achieve their dreams." As if summoned by the mention of his name, there was a knock at the office door. Modi's assistant entered, followed by Meera and Arjun, who had been brought to the building after the initial shock of the reunion had worn off. "Papa," Arjun said, his eyes wide as he took in the office, the displays, the evidence of his father's importance in the life of the Prime Minister. "What is all this?" Rajesh looked at his son, seeing in his young face the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that he had felt at that age. "It's a second chance," he said simply, "a chance to be the man I always wanted to be." Meera moved to her husband's side, her eyes taking in the documents, the photographs, the clear evidence of the friendship that had shaped both their lives in ways she was only beginning to understand. "What does this mean for us?" she asked quietly. Modi stepped forward, his manner respectful but confident. "It means that your family will never have to worry about security again. It means that Rajesh will have the resources and support to do work that matters, work that will impact thousands of lives. And it means that Arjun will grow up seeing his father as the remarkable man he truly is." He turned to address Arjun directly. "Your father is one of the most intelligent, capable people I've ever known. The fact that the world hasn't recognized that yet doesn't diminish his worth. It just means the world hasn't been paying attention." As the family absorbed this information, Modi made one final revelation. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for official announcements. "Tomorrow, I'm announcing the expansion of the technical education program. We're doubling the number of centers, increasing funding, and establishing partnerships with major manufacturers across the country." He paused, letting the significance of this sink in. "The announcement will be made from the Ahmedabad Center, with its new director by my side. If you're willing, Rajesh, I'd like that director to be you." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the offer became clear. This wasn't just about a job or even a career change. This was about stepping into a role that would make Rajesh a national figure, a symbol of the program's mission to recognize and develop talent regardless of background or circumstances. "The media will want to know our story," Modi continued. "They'll want to understand how a neighborhood mechanic became the director of a national education initiative. Are you prepared for that level of attention?" Rajesh looked around the room, at his wife, whose eyes shone with pride and possibility, at his son, who was seeing his father in an entirely new light, at his oldest friend, who had never forgotten the promises they had made as boys. And in that moment, he understood that this wasn't just about accepting a job, it was about accepting the responsibility to be the person he had always been capable of becoming. "Yes," he said, his voice strong and clear for the first time in years. "I'm ready." The transformation was immediate and visible. The man who had entered this office as a struggling mechanic was leaving as the director of a national education program. But more importantly, he was leaving as someone who had rediscovered his own worth and potential. As the sun set over Ahmedabad, casting golden light through the office windows, the two friends stood together once more, no longer separated by the vast gulf of their different circumstances, but united by the shared understanding that their friendship had always been about more than personal connection. It had been about the belief that everyone deserves the chance to reach their full potential, and that sometimes all it takes is someone who believes in you enough to offer that chance. The story that had begun with a chance encounter in a mechanic's shop was ending with the promise of new beginnings, not just for Rajesh and his family, but for the thousands of young people who would benefit from the program he would now lead. It was a reminder that the most powerful force in the world isn't politics or money or fame, it's the enduring power of friendship and the willingness to lift others up rather than leave them behind. But perhaps most importantly, it was proof that it's never too late for a second chance, and that sometimes the most broken things, when properly repaired, become stronger and more beautiful than they ever were before. As they prepared to leave the office and face the media attention that would surely follow, Modi placed his hand on his friend's shoulder one last time. "Ready to change the world?" he asked, echoing the words they had spoken to each other as young men full of dreams and determination. "With you?" Rajesh replied, his voice filled with the confidence that had been missing for so many years. "Always." And with that, they walked together toward a future that would prove that the best stories aren't about individual success, but about the power of friendship to transform not just two lives, but countless others who would benefit from their renewed partnership. The cameras were waiting, the questions were ready, and the world was about to learn about a friendship that had quietly shaped national policy for over a decade. But for Rajesh and Modi, the most important moment had already passed. The moment when they had chosen to trust in each other once again, and in doing so, had rediscovered the power of the dreams they had shared as boys.